Dahomey Amazons. Picture this: West Africa, 1800s, and the most feared warriors on the battlefield aren't men, they're women. The Dahomey Amazons were an all-female military regiment that made grown men turn and run. These weren't just token soldiers, folks. We're talking about elite fighters who went through training so brutal it would make boot camp look like summer vacation. They took vows of celibacy, lived in the royal palace, and were considered married to the king himself. Here's the kicker: they were often more disciplined and fiercer than their male counterparts. Armed with rifles, machetes, and razor-sharp blades, these women charged into battle without hesitation. European colonizers who faced them wrote home about the sheer terror of fighting an army of women who showed absolutely no mercy. They'd practice their skills on condemned prisoners, just to stay sharp. The Dahomey Amazons weren't playing around, they were the real deal, protecting their kingdom for nearly 3 centuries. When France finally conquered Dahomey in the 1890s, these warriors fought to the last woman, refusing to surrender. Now that's what you call dedication to duty. Aztec warrior orders. The Aztecs didn't just have an army, they had a military cult that would give modern special forces a run for their money. At the top of the food chain were 2 elite warrior societies, the Jaguar Warriors and the Eagle Knights. But here's what makes them absolutely bizarre by today's standards: their entire warfare doctrine was built around capturing enemies alive, not killing them. But for human sacrifice, of course. These warriors wore elaborate costumes that would look right at home in a heavy metal concert, full jaguar pelts or massive eagle headdresses with feathers and beaks. Their weapons were equally wild: wooden clubs embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades that could decapitate a horse in one swing. To join these elite orders, you had to capture at least 4 enemies in battle single-handedly. The Aztecs believed warfare was a sacred duty, and every battle was essentially a religious ceremony. They'd arrange battles ahead of time with enemy states, almost like scheduling a football game. The psychological warfare was off the charts. Imagine facing warriors dressed as giant predatory animals, screaming war cries, certain that dying in battle guaranteed them paradise. It's no wonder they dominated central Mexico for centuries before the Spanish showed up. North Korean People's Army. Let's talk about modern weird, because North Korea takes the cake for the strangest military force operating today. With over 1.2 million active soldiers and 7.7 million reservists, this hermit kingdom has one of the largest standing armies on Earth. But size isn't what makes them strange, it's everything else. First off, military service is mandatory, and we're not talking about a couple years. Men serve minimum 10 years, women 7. That's basically giving up your entire 20s to the state. The equipment is mostly Soviet-era relics from the 1960s and 70s, yet they parade around like they're a superpower. Here's where it gets truly bizarre. Soldiers are so malnourished that the minimum height requirement had to be lowered to 4 feet 7 inches. Think about that: chronic food shortages are literally shrinking the army. They've got one of the world's largest special forces units, trained in tunneling, and there are suspected tunnels under the DMZ that could deploy thousands of troops into South Korea within hours. The cult of personality is off the charts. Soldiers worship the Kim family like gods. And don't forget their pleasure squads, young women selected to entertain the elite. It's an army stuck in a time warp, mixing Cold War paranoia with medieval-style loyalty oaths. 10,000 Immortals, Persia. Ancient Persia's Persian Empire built the largest empire the world had ever seen, and at its core was an elite fighting force so legendary they got a Hollywood movie made about them 2,500 years later. The 10,000 Immortals were King Xerxes' personal guard and the backbone of Persian military might. But here's what made them truly weird and terrifying: the unit always numbered exactly 10,000 men. Not 9,999, not 10,001, exactly 10,000. The moment a soldier died, was wounded, or got sick, he was immediately replaced. The enemy never knew if they'd actually inflicted casualties because the ranks were always full. Talk about psychological warfare. These warriors weren't just fighters, they were a PR campaign on legs. They wore elaborate robes, gold jewelry, and carried spears with silver pomegranates on the bottom. They looked more like they were heading to a royal banquet than a battlefield. But don't let the fancy dress fool you, these guys conquered everything from India to Greece. They were the first professional standing army in history, paid year-round, fully equipped by the state. The Spartans at Thermopylae made them famous in the West, but the Immortals were the real deal, an unstoppable force that kept the Persian Empire running for over 2 centuries. Anabaptist Army of Munster. Here's a story that sounds made up but isn't. In 1534, radical religious protesters took over an entire German city and created one of history's most insane military experiments. The Anabaptists believed the apocalypse was coming and that Munster was the new Jerusalem. So they kicked out anyone who wouldn't get rebaptized, confiscated all private property, and instituted polygamy because why not? Their leader, a Dutch baker named Jan Matthys, declared himself a prophet and organized the city's defense against Catholic and Lutheran armies laying siege. When Matthys got killed in a suicidal charge, an even crazier guy named John of Leyden took over, crowned himself king, and things went completely off the rails. This army was made up of bakers, blacksmiths, and farmers who genuinely believed God would smite their enemies with lightning bolts. They fought with religious fervor that scared the hell out of professional soldiers. The siege lasted over a year, and as food ran out, King John threw banquets while everyone else starved. They melted church bells into cannons and raided Catholic supply lines with guerrilla tactics. When the city finally fell in 1535, the Anabaptist leaders were tortured to death and hung in cages from a church tower as a warning. Those cages are still there today, a reminder of one of history's wildest religious military movements. Ikoiki warrior monks. Japan's got samurai, ninjas, and then something most people never heard of: Buddhist warrior monks who ran their own independent military states. The Ikoiki were members of a radical Buddhist sect who decided that spiritual enlightenment and kicking ass weren't mutually exclusive. From the 1400s to late 1500s, these monks controlled entire provinces in Japan, running what were essentially theocratic military republics. Here's the weird part: they weren't professional soldiers. These were farmers, merchants, and priests who grabbed weapons and formed militias based on religious fervor. They believed their faith made them invincible in battle, and they fought with the kind of suicidal courage that comes from thinking you're on a divine mission. They used everything from swords and spears to some of the first guns ever seen in Japan. The Ikoiki were so successful that they became a major headache for the samurai warlords trying to unify Japan. Their fortress temple complexes were incredibly well defended. Think medieval castle meets monastery. The most famous, Ishiyama Honganji in Osaka, withstood siege warfare for over a decade. Oda Nobunaga, the most powerful warlord in Japan, fought them for years and eventually had to massacre tens of thousands to break their power. These warrior monks proved that religious conviction can turn ordinary people into formidable fighters. Hussite armies. Ever heard of a military revolution started by burning a priest at the stake? That's exactly what happened in 15th century Bohemia, and it created one of the most innovative and bizarre armies in medieval Europe. Jan Hus was a religious reformer who got burned for heresy in 1415, and his followers, the Hussites, decided to fight back. These were mostly Czech peasants and townspeople, but they revolutionized warfare in ways that professional armies wouldn't figure out for another century. Their secret weapon? War wagons. Imagine a circle of armored wagons chained together, with soldiers firing crossbows, early guns, and even primitive cannons from behind mobile cover. It was like a medieval tank formation, and it was absolutely devastating against traditional cavalry charges. The Hussites fought 5 separate crusades sent by the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire, and they won every single time. Their general, Jan Žižka, was a one-eyed military genius who never lost a battle even after he went completely blind. He kept commanding through trusted subordinates. The Hussite armies would sing hymns as they marched into battle, which terrified their enemies who thought they were facing religious fanatics possessed by demons. They pioneered combined arms tactics, mixing infantry, artillery, and cavalry in coordinated attacks centuries before it became standard. For 20 years, these heretical farmers humiliated the best knights in Europe, proving that tactics and technology beat noble birth every time. Janissary Corps. The Ottoman Empire created what might be the most ethically disturbing military unit in history, and it lasted for nearly 500 years. The Janissaries were the Sultan's elite infantry, but here's the twisted part: they were Christian boys kidnapped from conquered territories, forcibly converted to Islam, and raised to be fanatically loyal soldiers. This practice, called devshirme, was essentially state-sponsored child abduction turned into military policy. Boys as young as 8 were taken from families in Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and other Balkans regions, brought to Istanbul, and trained in special schools. They weren't allowed to marry or own property. The core was their only family, the Sultan their only father. And it worked terrifyingly well. The Janissaries became the first modern standing army in Europe, professional soldiers paid regular salaries and equipped with the latest firearms. They were instrumental in Ottoman conquests from Vienna to Baghdad. But over time, they became a monster the sultans couldn't control. They gained political power, started demanding privileges, and would literally overthrow sultans they didn't like. By the 1800s, they'd become more of a threat to the empire than its enemies. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II finally had enough and slaughtered thousands of them in what's called the Auspicious Incident. Basically, he invited them to a parade and opened fire with cannons. It was the bloody end to one of history's strangest and most controversial military institutions. Mahdiist Army. Sudan in the 1880s saw the rise of a religious military movement so powerful it defeated the British Empire and created an independent Islamic state in the heart of Africa. The Mahdi, meaning the guided one, was a charismatic religious leader named Muhammad Ahmad who declared himself the prophesied redeemer of Islam. His followers, the Ansar, became a military force that combined tribal warriors with religious zealots in a way that was absolutely lethal. These guys fought with swords, spears, and outdated rifles against British forces armed with Gatling guns and modern artillery, and they won major battles. The Mahdiist army operated on pure religious conviction and incredible tactical mobility. They were masters of desert warfare, appearing out of nowhere to overwhelm garrisons and supply columns. In 1885, they captured Khartoum and killed General Charles Gordon, one of Britain's most celebrated military heroes, in a battle that shocked the Victorian world. The Mahdiist state lasted 13 years, ruling Sudan as a strict Islamic theocracy. Their army grew to over 50,000 warriors, organized into divisions marked by different colored flags. What made them truly bizarre was the mixture of medieval combat methods with modern geopolitical awareness. The Mahdi negotiated with European powers while his warriors charged machine guns with swords. They were finally defeated at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, where British guns mowed down 10,000 Mahdiist soldiers in a single day. But for over a decade, these religious warriors had done the impossible: beat back European colonialism. Mamluk Army. Here's a military system that sounds completely made up: an army of slave soldiers who became so powerful they overthrew their masters and ruled Egypt for over 250 years. The Mamluks were originally slaves, mostly Turkish, Circassian, and Georgian boys purchased or captured and brought to Egypt. They were trained from childhood to be elite cavalry warriors, given the best education, equipment, and training money could buy. Then in 1250, they staged a coup, killed the Sultan, and took over. And here's where it gets really weird: they kept the same system going. Mamluk generals would buy new slave boys, train them, and the cycle continued. You couldn't inherit power as a Mamluk, you had to come up through the slave soldier ranks. It was a military meritocracy built on slavery, which is about as contradictory as you can get. These guys were the finest heavy cavalry in the medieval world. They stopped the Mongol invasion cold at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, one of the most important battles you've never heard of. The Mongols had conquered everything from China to Eastern Europe, but the Mamluks beat them in open battle and saved the Middle East from total devastation. They also kicked the Crusaders out of the Holy Land for good. Mamluk warriors trained constantly with composite bows, swords, and lances, and their horsemanship was legendary. They finally fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1517, but not before leaving their mark as one of history's most effective and bizarre military systems. Turkmenistan's army. Let's jump back to the modern era with a military force that's weird for entirely different reasons. Turkmenistan is a Central Asian dictatorship that most Americans couldn't find on a map, and its military is like something out of a satirical novel. The country was run by a dentist-turned-dictator named Saparmurat Niyazov, who declared himself Turkmenbashi, father of all Turkmen, and created a personality cult that makes North Korea look subtle. He wrote a spiritual book that soldiers had to study alongside military tactics. He renamed months after himself and his mother. And the military? It exists primarily to look impressive in parades and protect the regime from its own people. The army has about 36,000 active soldiers, equipped with rusting Soviet equipment from the Cold War era. Conscription is mandatory, and conditions are reportedly brutal. Hazing is endemic, and soldiers are essentially slave labor used for construction projects and farming. Here's the bizarre part. Despite being a military dictatorship, Turkmenistan is officially neutral and hasn't fought a war with anyone. The army's main job is internal security and looking intimidating during national celebrations. They've got tanks that barely run, planes that rarely fly, and naval vessels in a country that's landlocked. The current president, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, continues the tradition of weirdness. He fires guns while riding horses in propaganda videos and performs donuts in rally cars to prove his vitality. This is a military force designed not to fight external enemies but to project power internally and feed the dictator's ego. Eritrean National Service. Eritrea has what might be the most oppressive mandatory military service program on planet Earth, and it's created a humanitarian crisis that's driven hundreds of thousands of people to flee the country. By law, every Eritrean citizen, male and female, must serve in the national service program starting at age 18. Officially, it's supposed to last 18 months. In reality, people serve for decades, sometimes indefinitely. The government can extend your service whenever they want, and you have no say in the matter. You're paid about $40 a month, forced to work on government farms, construction projects, or whatever labor the regime demands. It's essentially legalized slavery disguised as patriotic duty. The Eritrean government justifies this by claiming they're in a perpetual state of emergency due to tensions with Ethiopia, but the war officially ended in 2000. This isn't a military preparing for combat, it's a system of control where indefinite conscription keeps the population subjugated and provides free labor for government projects. Young people trying to escape are shot at the border, and families of deserters face punishment. The military itself is estimated at around 200,000 active personnel, but morale is non-existent. Equipment is outdated, training is poor, and the whole system is designed more to control the population than to defend the nation. It's created one of the world's worst refugee crises. Thousands of Eritreans risk death crossing the Mediterranean every year just to escape military service. This is what happens when conscription becomes a tool of oppression rather than national defense. Boxer militias. Turn of the 20th century China saw one of the strangest uprisings in modern history. Peasant martial artists who believed they were immune to bullets tried to kick out all the foreigners and Christians in the Boxer Rebellion. These weren't trained soldiers. They were members of secret societies who practiced traditional Chinese martial arts and ritual magic. They called themselves the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. Westerners called them Boxers. They believed that through special breathing exercises, martial arts training, and spiritual possession by ancient Chinese gods, they could become invulnerable to modern weapons. So they charged at armies armed with rifles and artillery, genuinely thinking the bullets would bounce off. Spoiler alert, the bullets did not bounce off. But what made the Boxers weird wasn't just their supernatural beliefs, it was how this grassroots movement nearly expelled 8 colonial powers from China simultaneously. Starting in 1899, Boxer militias swept through northern China, killing Christian missionaries, Chinese Christians, and foreign diplomats. They laid siege to Beijing's foreign legation quarter for 55 days. The Qing dynasty government, desperate and confused, officially supported them at first, essentially declaring war on the entire Western world plus Japan. An 8-nation alliance had to send 20,000 troops to relieve the siege. The Boxers fought with swords, spears, and outdated muskets against machine guns and modern artillery, and they kept coming. Tens of thousands died before the movement collapsed. It was a bizarre collision of traditional Chinese culture with modern imperialism, and it showed both the power and the tragic futility of religious fanaticism against industrial warfare. Taiping Heavenly Kingdom Army. The deadliest war you've never heard of happened in mid-1800s China and killed more people than World War I. The Taiping Rebellion was led by a guy named Hong Xiuquan who failed his civil service exams, had a nervous breakdown, and decided he was Jesus Christ's younger brother. Yes, you read that right. He claimed God told him to overthrow the Qing dynasty and establish a heavenly kingdom on earth. And millions of Chinese peasants believed him and joined his army. At its peak, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom controlled territory with about 30 million people and fielded armies hundreds of thousands strong. This wasn't just a rebellion, it was an attempt to create a theocratic Christian state in China based on Hong's bizarre interpretation of Christianity mixed with Chinese traditions. His army enforced strict moral codes. No opium, no alcohol, no tobacco, no gambling. Men and women served in separate military units, and his soldiers genuinely believed they were fighting a holy war. They captured Nanjing in 1853 and made it their capital, renaming it the Heavenly Capital. For over a decade, they fought the Qing dynasty and various provincial armies in battles that make the American Civil War look like a skirmish. We're talking about battles with hundreds of thousands of casualties. The Taiping armies used a mixture of traditional Chinese weapons and captured modern firearms. What made them truly terrifying was their religious fanaticism. They fought with the conviction that death in battle guaranteed paradise. The rebellion finally collapsed in 1864 after 14 years of warfare that killed an estimated 20 to 30 million people. It's one of history's deadliest conflicts, led by one of history's strangest military-religious movements. Bolivian Armed Forces. Let's end with something contemporary and slightly more lighthearted. Bolivia has a military that's weird not because it's particularly fierce or oppressive, but because it's hilariously dysfunctional in ways that are almost charming. Bolivia is a landlocked country, yet it maintains a full navy complete with admirals, ships, and naval bases on lakes and rivers. Because they lost their coastline to Chile in a war back in 1879 and they're still bitter about it over 140 years later. They celebrate Day of the Sea every year, where the Navy parades around demanding their ocean access back. It's like your buddy who still won't shut up about his ex-girlfriend from high school. The military has about 35,000 active personnel and is equipped primarily with old US, Brazilian, and European hand-me-downs. But here's where it gets interesting. The Bolivian military has overthrown the civilian government so many times they've lost count. Over 190 coups or coup attempts since independence in 1825. That's basically a coup attempt every couple of years for 2 centuries. The military's main historical role hasn't been fighting external enemies, it's been interfering in domestic politics. Conditions for regular soldiers are reportedly poor, with low pay and outdated equipment. The most action the Bolivian military sees these days is fighting drug traffickers in the jungle and dealing with domestic unrest. They've got Chinese-made aircraft that rarely fly, tanks that were old when your parents were born, and a navy that can't reach the ocean. Yet they maintain all the formal structures of a serious military power, complete with brass bands, ceremonial uniforms, and enough generals to command an army 3 times their size. It's endearing in its own way, a reminder that sometimes military history is less about glory and conquest, and more about national pride, historical grudges, and bureaucratic inertia. Thanks for watching this video to the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We will love to know the country you are watching from in the comments section, and if you have any video ideas that you will love us to work on, don't hesitate to drop it in the comments section. See you soon in our next videos.